Hey, good evening, everybody. Hope everyone can hear me. Hope everyone is well, and thanks for, I suppose, joining a day early and an hour earlier than that. So appreciate that. Let me just double check. I am going live. It does look to be the case, so that's always a good sign. If someone could just message in the chat, I suppose, make sure I know you can hear me. What I would say is I've got my mobile open. I've got it in the Discord chat. So if there are any issues with the stream for whatever reason, just feel free to. Probably going to be easier to message me on the Discord Avengers channel thread than in the YouTube one, because I will actually be on another page and not looking at it so much. But with all that being said, let us just crack straight on. So where are we? Well, it's actually been a bit of a fall, not too bad since we last spoke. And I know it's only been 6 days. The last time we spoke, we were kind of, edging in and around that sort of 108, 109 level. We're now sort of sitting at 104. We've been down as low as 103. And whilst that's not that big a drop, it does certainly feel to me like sentiment has slightly shifted a little bit with the reawakening of discussions in and around tariffs, which we'll talk about in a moment. But we have sort of seen this, retracement back down to, still a fairly decent level. Let's not beat around the bush there. 104. We're still going to be happy with that. But I suppose a lot of people are now sort of wondering, is this actually the start of a correction, or have we just pulled back to significant levels before we move back on? And even on the levels that we've got indicated here, I don't know why I've got a double line. Let me just get rid of one of these. We have lost that 106 level, which is fine. And then we've been down and just about touched the sort of the 102. We've not quite got there on this candle, and there's 6 hours left to go on that. But this is the major one. This is the one in which we've had quite a bit of price action in recent history, and then back sort of the first attempt at the all-time high, and then also in around the inauguration in January. This is where we really saw a level of support, and it took a bit of work to get through it. So that's kind of where we're holding on to at the moment. I'm conscious that people can't hear me, so I'm just going back. Okay, hopefully people can. Good. Right. So yeah, there's still stuff to work with from what we can see there. When we go into Bitcoin towards the end, and we have a look at it on sort of daily charts and with other figures, I think there is another level in around 100, which actually makes a bit more sense as to where we may fall back down. But we'll discuss that one a little bit later on. We look at some of the other ones. Bitcoin dominance creeping back up as it has been over the last couple of candles. But you can see with this candle, potentially a bit of a high test. Now, I would query whether or not this high test is that valid, given that it is in an upward trend. And I know people do like to draw sort of, trend lines on this, and I've done this in the past as well. And we can kind of see, even on the 3-day, well, actually, when you look at it from body to body, it's not really touching. I was kind of hoping it was going to, connect a little bit better. I think I'm just drawing a line there to make it work rather than it actually is. But I do feel that actually, as the Bitcoin dominance is moving back up, those candles are getting more and more compressed, certainly on the 3-day time frame. So maybe for those of us that are heavy in altcoins, this could just be the break that we need to see some altcoin relief. And unfortunately, they have not really been getting the love, and they haven't been for some time. I've talked about this for a while. We look at total market cap. So this is total 2, so everything minus Bitcoin. That golden level of 1.25 trillion, we just haven't been able to get over it and sustain that. Since February, really, when we originally lost it. Appreciate a couple of wicks have gone above that, but nothing significant. And we have seen that actually we've started to fall back down. And this isn't on a chart in which I show vector candles, but I'm almost certain that if there was this candle here from 1 trillion to 1.2 trillion would probably have been a blue or a green vector candle. So the concern now is that actually, do we start to see a significant retracement of that? 50% line would be in around 1.1 trillion, just eyeballing it. And if we are starting to continue that move back down, and nothing to get worried about Bitcoin falling down if that's where it's going to be, pullbacks happen, that's got to be expected. But is that a likely target for the rest of the altcoin market, or for all altcoins, I suppose? And then when we look at BitTensor, and we will go into much more detail on BitTensor, I think Sam actually just posted something about there's some significant sell pressure on Mexi at the moment. But even just looking at sort of these candles here on a 3-day time frame, last week it did look like we were gearing up for, because we were here, sort of some sort of move, looking to sort of move back up with a bullish flag. That hasn't been the case, and the reason behind that is what we're going to talk about in a moment once I get rid of this and that. And we've seen that sort of correction come back down. What is concerning is we had that big sharp move back down to sort of like 380. We then had a great rally overnight to sort of that 450 mark, which then just could not hold itself. And we've lost the majority of that again. And we now find ourselves below. It always moves this line here. And maybe I move it. I don't know. I think it's there. I have it. Anyway, below this trend line. And I got to say that, certainly in the short term, I think there's some levels we really need to hold on BitTensor to sort of continue that move up. Otherwise, we have that move back down. Now, am I particularly worried about BitTensor? No, not really. All of the stuff that I had en route, I've still got there. I haven't sold, I haven't unstaked or sold any, mainly because, we were fortunate enough to get back in, in the 200s. And I just feel we're far enough away from that. Plus, I'm still on holiday, so I don't really want to be faffing around with all of that. I might as well explain now that although I'm going to talk about Tau BTC trade a little bit later on, I have actually sold that Tau back into Bitcoin yesterday just because I didn't like the way that was moving. And I know there was some discussions on the trading thread about doing that. So that has taken place, and it was at break even. I waited, I saw it at break even. I took the opportunity to swap it back across, and then I just feel more comfortable for the remaining days I'm on holiday. Just stay in Bitcoin, and we'll reevaluate when I can get back some proper chart time. All right, just one last flick here, make sure everything's okay. And yeah, hey everyone, hope you're all doing well. Let us just jump into some of the discussion. So, what caused that slight correction? What is causing this uncertainty? The same thing that's caused this uncertainty since the end of March, and that is the talk in and around tariffs. And we opened our gobs last week, didn't we? And we said we hadn't really heard too much about tariffs. And then what happens on Thursday? Well, actually, I don't know which courts it was in America. It doesn't necessarily matter. But they deemed that actually Donald Trump was exceeding his presidential authority by instigating these reciprocal tariffs, which caused a major level of uncertainty in the markets, and also what he has been basing the last 6 to 8 weeks of his economic plan, if you will, for America on, into doubt. So there was some uncertainty there. Then, not worse, but just to increase that level of uncertainty, the following day, President Trump got a 2-week reprieve to sort of, plead his case to the courts and appeal the decision that has been made, which I don't think has necessarily enabled the markets to recover. If anything, actually, that has continued to cause that uncertainty and that unease in the markets. And if you just think about where we currently stand with that, so we've got Trump appealing a decision made by the courts in which he is led to have exceeded his power, his presidential power, talking about reciprocal tariffs, of which the two major entities that we're really still uncertain on, the EU and China, have both been put also on pauses whilst they try and negotiate further. So there's just so much compounding uncertainty right now. There's no wonder that investors are not really wanting to make a move in either direction. And so they're kind of, in my opinion, just sitting, maybe not sitting on their hands, but certainly just waiting to see which direction this is going to go. And I hate to say it, and I've said it for a couple of weeks, but it's such an important issue that the mention or the change in stance of tariffs can undermine any TA on any traditional or crypto-related chart you may want to look at in a click of a fingers. And because of that unprecedented sort of ability that one word has, it makes it very difficult to trade. And so, for those of you that don't particularly have the stomach to want to trade, or, I would just say just get in whatever you felt comfortable in or feel comfortable in for the next few months, and just we'll see how this rides itself out. Obviously, any big news is going to be brought to you either by myself or Simon. We talk twice a week. We're always on Discord anyway. Maybe you can reevaluate your decisions from that there. But as it currently stands at the moment, it is a very difficult environment to be up. And this is being, it's not just in traditional markets, which we discussed last week, but also in the crypto markets. People are now starting to try and gain the effect that the change in stance on tariffs is having, because of the uncertainty and the volatility that causes. And I think that's just, it's just food for market makers to just be able to manipulate those charts, in my opinion, on a greater level. So just be very careful with how you want to go about trading at the moment. If you are trading, I think there's definite opportunities to take advantage of in the trades. Just be careful with sort of your exposure and how you're managing to do that. We can talk about that one a little bit later on. I mentioned it here. I think the UK, we generally, I haven't seen that the ink has dried on any of these treaties, but as I understand it, there is some agreement in place with the tariffs. But as I mentioned, the EU is one of the big players that's outstanding. And what I would say is, yes, okay, Trump can come out as often as he wants to say that they've agreed some trade deal with Nepal or Bangladesh or India, and I appreciate India is a big country. But in reality, I think the three main markets that he needs to come to some sort of agreement with, whether it be positive or negative, I don't think the markets will necessarily care. They just prefer on having the certainty. Of course, a negative one will have an immediate negative impact. But those three markets are the UK, which looks like it has been done, the EU and China. And as I mentioned earlier, EU and China, both on delays at the moment. I think the EU's is until the 1st of July. And China's, it's probably some other time in July 16th, something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it could well be that in a month's time, we're just going to get back in the same position where they can't agree it. We're going to have, large sums thrown across, Twitter, social, whatever you want to call it, and then another round of negotiations. And with that, we'll get the seesaw action that we've come used to seeing when we get around this. I don't think it's quite the picture that 90% of us in the group thought we were going to be having 3 or 4 months into this presidency, but it's where we find ourselves at the moment. And we've got one of two things we can do. If we're brave enough and bold enough and we have the discipline, then we can take advantage and try and trade that one. If that isn't our cup of tea, we kind of just got to knuckle down and wait for this to resolve itself. Unfortunately, that's where it sits. Moving away from tariffs, at least for now, we talked about the Bitcoin conference, the is in capital T, Bitcoin conference, the one that happens every year. This year it was based in Las Vegas. It happened just over the weekend. And whilst, in previous years gone by, there's certain parallels that can be drawn to say that actually immediately following this conference, Bitcoin's price does drop, which is taking place as well at the moment. But one of the talks I absolutely implore you to watch, it's only 30 minutes or 36 minutes long, is Michael Saylor's talk. It's fascinating, actually, because he's addressing it to us. He's not trying to convert people, which is he mentions at the beginning of this, trying to convert CEOs and non-believers and the like. This talk here is actually, right, we're already believers. What can we now do to ensure that we stay ahead of that wealth curve? And he's got 21 ways in which he very quickly goes through. I will post a link for the video. I promise you it is worth the watch, even if you do it at 1.5 speed. But I'm not going to go through them all, but I did write them down, his 21. And I'll post this in here as well for those of you that really can't be bothered to watch it. But I think some of the things he talks about, particularly in point number 5, which is capability and utilizing AI and the power that AI is going to have to help generate wealth for the average person. It really hit home with me. But he goes into talk about, there's a lot of C's here: clarity, conviction, courage, cooperation, capability, composition, citizenship, civility, corporation, focus, equity, credit, compliance, capitalization, communication, commitment, competence, adaptation, evolution, advocacy, and generosity. They're the 21. It is a very compelling 35 minute talk that he gave. And I think, if nothing else, a lot of us here, we set out on this journey to, buck the system, try and find some sort of wealth through an avenue which was, an outlier to start off with. It's starting to get very much more legitimized right now, and I think it was a lot of things he talks about there in not losing sight of your end goal and everything else. I think it's a really good reminder potentially for some of us. And hey, if you don't want to do it, absolutely fine. But if you watch it, just take it with with a completely open mind. Just watch it and then just ask yourself that question: do I want to agree with what he's saying? If I do agree with what he's saying, how is my current position and plan laid out to align with that in any way? And I think if you go in with that mind and you're happy with it, then absolutely fine. But if you feel there's an opportunity for changings, I think it goes in there. And there's a point he makes that a lot of the people in this world found Bitcoin way before Saylor, but they didn't have the courage or the conviction or the clarity to just get on and do it. And they messed around with other things, thinking they'll come back. And that's probably not the best way of going about it. Of course, none of us have 40 odd billion to throw into Bitcoin now, but it is well worth watching. And I found this was quite interesting. At the end, well, not at the end of that talk, but afterwards, he's on Twitter and he's talking about he'd actually like to speak to Joe Rogan about Bitcoin and sort of the benefits that could have on the world. And Joe Rogan, I'm a big fan of the Joe Rogan podcast. I really enjoy that long form podcast. I appreciate not everyone has 3 hours to listen to it, but I do believe it is probably the most listened to podcast in the world. So it'd be a great opportunity for a bit more exposure there. Joe Rogan, I wouldn't say necessarily say he sits on the fence with cryptocurrency. He is not a fan of altcoins. I think that's probably fair to say. He does believe in Bitcoin. He posted his public address not so long ago. I think in like 2014 he had about 5 Bitcoin. I don't know if he's got any more from that, but so he's got a little bit of exposure within there. But I think it'd be really interesting. I think Joe would have a good time sort of interrogating Saylor's belief and journey that he's had through that. And it'd be really interesting if he then, because he's not going to mince it. Joe, we're pals, you see. He's not going to mince his words or his questions. That'd be great if he actually did start to question how strategy is really, well, we call it the infinite money glitch, but how they're utilizing shares and shareholders to continue to buy. Sorry, I've got a bad cold. And increase their exposure to Bitcoin. So that'd be interesting to see. In other news, just very quickly, I talked about the Circle IPO. I've no real major update on the date of when that's coming out or anything, but I just thought it was interesting that both BlackRock have sort of suggested an interest in acquiring up to 10% of the IPO, and then Cathie Wood's company, ARK Investment, they have also notified the SEC of their intention to get on board with Circle's IPO. So, there's some big players, people who are heavily involved in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin that really want to see Circle do well on the stock exchange and have that level of exposure. As I understand it, the demand for the IPO far exceeds what is going to be available, which really screams to me a bit of a pump and dump for the first couple of weeks. So it's not something to dive straight into. I think I made that point clear last week, but I'll certainly still be keeping an eye on this one and where this is going. Okay, let's move on. So getting into, wait a second. Let me just see if anyone's asked anything or made a comment. I think we're all good at the moment. Okay, perfect. I think we are. There we go. Sorry, it took a while for my screen to update, but we're good. Okay, so let's get into a bit more of a deep dive on the price, where things have gone and what things are doing. And again, I just remind everyone we're looking at 12-hour candlesticks here. But what I find really interesting is, we find it interesting every week, but we spoke Tuesday last week here, there. And then look what price has done. Remember, this was a yellow box of liquidity. We're going to talk about potentially why price is headed down this way. But you can kind of see, we go through Wednesday, then Thursday, bang, Trump tariff news hits. And we go straight through it. We hit the bottom of that level, and then we move back up. Remember, my boxes are approximations. We pretty much hit the bottom of that level, and then the market makers have found a satisfactory area in which they can buy back, if you will, or stop hunting for further liquidations. And as we say, these just act as real markers of direction of which the market's going to go. And for me, I'm a true believer in market maker theory. I think it really does paint a picture, and if you can understand it, you can really drown out a lot of the noise and a lot of your bias or hopium of where you think the market's going to want to go. So we've kind of got there. It's happened so suddenly. We are starting to see a fairly big, I didn't bother putting it on because it's quite a shallow but a deep coloured liquidation level around about 103,000. I'm going to go on that point later, but there's a gentleman that is long in Bitcoin on Hyperliquid who is very vocal with what's happening. It's worth a lot of money, and I think he is just chumming the water, is my personal opinion, but we'll find out how that one goes out a little bit later on. Right now as well, ignoring the liquidation levels, you can just see all we've done is we've just fallen back to this shoulder, formation of a bullish rectangle, whatever you want to call it, in and around that price level, and that 103 to 104, 105 level, which we stayed there for a good part of a week and a half anyway. And that's kind of where we found ourselves from a local point of view. We can see a liquidation zone still down here, 99,300 to 101,300. And in terms of sort of a target where it's going, just bear those two figures in mind when we talk about Bitcoin on the lower time frames and with EMAs, etc., a little bit later on. Sorry, I'm trying to resist sniffing, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to. Excuse me. Apologies, air conditioning and all that. Maybe in the edit, I'll try and take some of those out. So there's potential for that move there. I mean, the other zone at the moment would mean a new attempt to run up at the all-time high. I'm not going to rule that out, obviously, because, hey, we may get an answer about tariffs that can really help send us that way. But assuming that there's no news necessarily about tariffs, I still think there's a fairly good chance because we're actually just sitting in a fairly tight zone. I mean, we're 105,000, let's just round it up there. We're even talking about 100K or 110K. We're bang in the middle of that. And so it's a kind of a coin flip of where we can take ourselves in terms of institutions. So, sorry, my PC's running a little slow. Come on. So, as I mentioned, and we saw back end of last week, a little bit of a turn in the tide towards inflow. So, this only shows to close a play on Friday. And on Friday was a particularly red day with even BlackRock finally making some sales. But even the day before, actually, across the board, it was a net outflow day. Now, today, it actually looks like BlackRock have... It's difficult to say whether they've been selling or just moving stuff around. But I think it was 3,500 BTC have been moved from BlackRock to Coinbase Prime. You can only see a couple there. I'll move it on to the next page if it will let me. I bet you have skipped 2 now because everything's going a bit slow. Sorry, it is going slow. Whilst we're waiting for that to load up, what I will say is that BlackRock still owns 665,000 BTC. So quite a lot within there. But as you can see, again, 7 hours ago, another 300, 300, 300, 300, 300, 300, 300. When you add all those together, it was 3,500 into 3,512 in total. They've gone, it looks like, to Coinbase Prime. I'm assuming to be sold. We'll have to wait and see. Close of play today when everything gets all tidied up and we see how Farside updates it. But I am expecting a fairly sizable red, at least for BlackRock today as well. And then we get on to, so what's that actually mean for us? Where are we going this summer? Because, we've talked about if we're sticking with that 4-year cycle, we're getting kind of close. We're 5, maybe 6 months away from where we think historically 4-year cycles have found their all-time high. It's plus or minus 30 days from the 1st of December. It's actually kind of plus or minus about 20 days from the 1st of December, because I think it was the 11th of November and the 17th of December were 2021 and 2017. So it's actually a little bit narrower than that. But this is a chart that we've had drawn up for years, to be perfectly frank. And it kind of breaks down each of the 4-year cycles into what years, what they do, and how I've at least viewed where you want to be with each of them. We've kind of just changed the wording in this final one, just because whether or not sitting in alts is the right move, we'll have to wait and see. But you can kind of see we're in that parabolic phase. We've not done too much. And this is a logarithmic chart, so it doesn't look like it's moved much. But is it logarithmic? Yeah, it is. We're in that phase. But I just want to talk about where we can be from the summer at the moment, because there's that adage, and people have talked about it in the last month and then every 12 months prior to that sell in May, go away. So the question is, are we in for a good summer with what Bitcoin's price action is going to be, with how altcoins are going to perform, or is this going to follow the cycle that we've seen in previous summers and sort of previous parabolic phase years? And what does that really mean? How can we sort of position ourselves to best take advantage of that? And if we go back 12 months, we'll look at sort of everything else after that. But even sort of 12 months ago, we had beginning of June, we saw a sort of a months-long pullback. July, it sort of went back up, and then we had another pullback through August, sort of just reinforcing that sell in May, go away kind of mentality. And even when we did see the rises back up, they never quite eclipsed where we were at the end of that May period. So it's something we've seen in the past that's happened. We sort of saw this through the year before, in which it kind of fell away through May. We had that move up in June, and then we sort of fall away again through July and August. In the bear market month, so 2022, that happened. But then interestingly, we have a look, and if we just take it from the green boxes, which is the bull run years, the parabolic blow off year. Sorry, my nose is running. Not very attractive, I appreciate. Let's just see what's happened, because we are starting to get into that phase now. We've had a sort of a peak, and we've had a couple of weeks of sort of downturn. I appreciate it's probably hard to see. Let me try and zoom in a little bit better. I'm on a much smaller monitor than I'm normally on. So we've had that move back down. If we go to this next screen, and we have a look sort of here. So May, we had that huge fall down in May 21, which was effectively the collapse of that first peak in April and May of 2021, losing 64,000. We went all the way back down to sub 30, and that sub 30 happened through May and June as we kind of just fell away. And you look at June, at one stage we were at 41,000, and we end up going down as low as 28,000. We continue to do that, and then July we turn around and we make some recovery. But there's definitely some history to sort of look through from there. If we then go back to the next parabolic run-up phase, and this was a more traditional parabolic run, the one that we're kind of hoping to experience this year. But still, as we run through May, we get into June, and actually we go from 3,000-ish, my PC's frozen, down to 1,785. So almost a 50% drop, 40% drop in price there, and then we recover ourselves again end of July through August and continue up. And then similarly, actually in the bull market in 2012, so pretty much predominantly Bitcoin now, we have that run up through August, and then in May, May's here, through to June, we have that fall down. So from 137, actually the peak of it is 164, down to 67, and we find that bottom end, and in July we climb back out. So there definitely is, a correlation or a coincidence, I suppose, because it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen this time around, that actually June is not the best of months for Bitcoin. And just because, let me go on this page first. When we look at the historical Bitcoin monthly returns via percentages, the last two, so last month, May, we had an 11% green month, which also contained Bitcoin's all-time high. You would generally think, actually, maybe we negated sell in May and go away because that was such a strong performing month. Similar with the year before, we had an 11% there. It wasn't quite an all-time high, because at the time, all-time high was 74,000, and I think we got to about 69 that month. But I think that sell in May is just it's a saying that's obviously works across all traditional markets as well. And it doesn't necessarily mean if we get to the 31st of May and we haven't seen the market drop, we're safe. It's just that's kind of the start of the period where we might start to see some of the prices fall away. Now, historically, in the sort of last 7 years, June has not been a good month for Bitcoin. And so, we've got to bear that one in mind. We're 2 days into it and we're only just in the red. So I don't think we can take anything from this right now. July, we've seen, just going through the historic data, that that's normally a month in which we do turn around, and it's June is the one that punishes us. Then we get that uncertainty back in sort of August and September, and it's usually the Halloween rally that brings us back in when we start Q4. So we're not quite started Q3 yet, but Q3 never normally a great month for us, and June is the bit that kickstarts that. So I'm not necessarily writing Bitcoin off. I'm sorry to give you a politician's answer and sit on the fence here, but I go back to sort of what we said at the beginning with, look, we have got 1st of July and I think the middle of July, both the EU and the China tariffs, either they come to some sort of agreement and it gets announced before those deadlines, or we go back to the soul-sucking, destroying tariffs of 129% or whatever it was on China and 50% on the EU, and the market has a reaction to that. Notwithstanding, we've also got a week and a half or so now before we find out whether Trump's actions are actually deemed, I don't know if the terms are legal, but not in line with what his presidential powers are. Maybe we should call it that. I don't want to do a Richard Nixon here and suggest that anything the president does is always legal. But anyway, we'll leave it there. I could go on with, the wars in Israel and also the Ukraine and what's ramping up there. And although, peace treaties have been, trying to be hammered out, that's not really going there. There's just that level of uncertainty. You add in that selling May. I would just say that uncertainty makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable at the moment. Not enough to necessarily do anything about it. But I'm just going to have to, unfortunately, position myself in where I can react as quickly as I possibly can, which without going into it, that is one of the reasons why I don't go into the alpha tokens on the subnets, just because of the liquidity. And if I try and put a large amount in there and try and have to get out in a hurry, I might struggle with that. So that's currently where that sits. We'll come back on and look at how that affects altcoins a little bit later on, just because I know some people have asked a couple of questions on that. But I'm just going to double check. There's no message or question. No, there's not. So we'll get back. And we'll look at some of the ones that people have asked for this week. So there's been 3. Tom's put, you were in a BTC trade with Tau. Well, as I mentioned, I'm actually not in anymore, but go on. And I know you briefly covered it a week or so back, but I'm still struggling to understand this fully. Can you run through how you trade alts with BTC? How you look at the charts and what the upside to this trade is. Okay, yeah, I think it's weird because if you think BTC or any alt versus the US dollar, it's incredibly easy to just look at the chart, understand what you're trying to get out from it. But as soon as you flip that and you, instead of having USDT, you have BTC as what you're comparing it to, and then an altcoin in front of it, for some reason it becomes incredibly complicated. Normally because you're dealing with decimal points, which, for those of us that aren't good at maths, that can make it quite confusing. But also you're suddenly not interested in the dollar value, which for weeks, months or years that you've been in crypto for, that's always been your go-to. It's always what some X is versus the US dollar or pound or whatever currency you're in. But for me, I've always done it against the dollar. So I can understand that confusion. And if you are new to it, it can be difficult to understand. But all you've got to really understand, and I'll go through an example in a moment, is when you historically or previously, when you've been involved in cryptocurrency, and whether it be spot trading, perp trading, whatever, your primary goal has been to increase your portfolio based in fiat currency, generally US dollar. So you're just looking to increase your US dollars, and you're doing that via buying, let's just stick to spot, shall we? Buying an alt or BTC at a lower price than what you intend to sell it. So when you then sell it, it's worth more dollars for you. Simple as that. Well, that is the same principle with what you're doing with BTC. Now, I don't want to confuse you. There aren't many exchanges, if any. I don't think there's many that allow you to buy spot altcoins directly with BTC. So one of the confusions you have is normally what you do is even if you had a pot of BTC, you're selling it to fiat and then immediately using that fiat, the entire amount of it, to buy whatever altcoin it is you want to do it. And so although it is 2 transactions, because of the time span in which it's taken to do those 2 transactions, it's effectively just buying it with your BTC. I mean, unless you're incredibly lucky, or lucky, and the price significantly changes in the 2 minutes, say, it takes you to make those 2 trades. So all you're looking to do, Tom, is whatever BTC you're starting with, you're now going to move it into an altcoin in the understanding that altcoin is going to increase in value versus BTC. So when you sell that altcoin back and via USDT and immediately into BTC, you then have more BTC than what you started off with. That's the underlying principle behind it. And that means that you are not actually bothered about what the USD value of that particular altcoin is, or necessarily what BTC's value is, US dollar value is, because that isn't going to help how that is converted. Of course, I know there is an action in there in which you are going to have to do a fiat conversion, but it happens so quickly, it doesn't necessarily matter. And if we try and have a look at an example, I probably should have had this chart on the start. So this is a Bitcoin US dollar chart. And the reason I've got this up here is actually it's for this column on the right-hand side, okay, which is USD. And of course, you can change it. So you can actually just change it to whatever you want to do. I wonder if I can find Tau. What do you reckon the chances are? Or is it? I saw a couple of cryptos on there. But yeah, there's a couple. There's not a lot though. There's Tron and a few others. Okay, it doesn't look like there's Tau. That's a shame. But when you typically look at any chart, it's USD. And what you're effectively saying is to buy one of whatever is whatever that price in that box is there at that time. I know that sounds really simplistic, but that is it. That is how it works when you look at it. So let's go with Tau BTC and just ignore the writing at the top at the moment. I've just done that for my maths agility a little bit later on. So it doesn't matter that we're on a weekly time frame. We're not necessarily bothered about that right now. All we're interested in exactly the same principle, because you can see it says BTC in this corner here down the right hand side. So to buy 1 Tau right now, if I was to buy it in BTC, it would cost me 0.003863 BTC. Okay? And that's it. And now that you understand that column on the right hand side is your how much it costs to buy, or how much BTC you get if you sell 1 Tau, you can start to interpret that chart a lot easier, because now you know, well, if these bars start to go up, it means that when I go to sell my Tau, I'm going to get more BTC for every Tau that I own. And so I will make more BTC. Similarly, if this goes down, the value BTC that I'll get once I sell everything will be less, much like if you sell BTC, you bought it at 100,000, you end up selling it at 90,000. It's gone down in price, gone down on the charts, and that's where it goes. So that's how it's done. So we can do some simple maths here. And you can tell that I wrote this a couple of 15-minute candles ago. But if I had 1 BTC, because I'm not going to get my calculator out again, at the time I did this example, 1 BTC would buy me 258.2 Tau. And that price at the time was 0.003881, which is written up here, okay? So if I then, whatever the TA is, I bought that and I thought, right, let me get an arrow. I thought, right, it's going to go up. And let's just say, right, where was it? So it's previous sort of like all-time high in BTC value for ease of maths is 0.01. I know it's 0.010223, but that's the example there. When I go to then sell my BTC, what I would end up doing is I would take 258.2 Tau and I would then times that by 0.01, which would give me 2.582 BTC. So I would have 2.5 times the amount of BTC I had, which kind of makes rough sense because 3.8 times 2.5 is going to get you to 0.1. So, I've not leverage traded it, I've just spot traded it, but the pattern or the TA may look more favorable in terms of that move. And what we actually saw with, Tau BTC, the value of Tau versus BTC was plummeting for months as it just went down and down and down. And then we got down to here, and when the price of Tau was at 160, and then suddenly that shot up over sort of a 10-day period, or a bit longer actually, and it meant that the value of Tau versus BTC shot up in price. So if you were fortunate enough to buy down here at 2.3 and you sold it now, you're going to get about 1.5 times the amount that you had originally got in BTC. And for someone like me that just likes to accumulate BTC, it's just a nice, easy way of doing it, and just using an asset I already own to be able to sort of do that rather than just BTC sitting there. So that's the theory behind it. As I say, I got out of that trade because I just don't really feel comfortable with how alts are doing. Now, I do accept that, on the weekly and on the daily time frame, you could argue there's potentially an inverted head and shoulders forming with a neckline sort of there, but this would have to make that move back up. And so I could ultimately end up on missing that move, and I accept that. But at least I'd have my BTC, which I value far greater than I do with the Tau. And right now, this is just altcoins for me are just not performing where I'd like them to be. Bitcoin dominance looks like it's continued to move back up. That just helped me make the decision to move back into BTC for the time being. I'm not really looking at the charts. I'm out most of the day with the family. Safe haven just being there for me. We'll reevaluate when I get home. So that's how we're doing that. Okay, just checking there's any comments on that. That's fine. Going back to the next question. Oh, Tom, what I would say, if you don't understand any further, I've absolutely butchered that, which I accept I may have done. Then just hit me up a message and maybe we can talk about it a little bit further. Andy's put, do you still think BTC and alts will peak at the end of this year? I said go back to have a look at that chart. If I can find it. Where was it here? Oh, I think So if we believe is in the 4-year cycle, and I'm going to believe in this 4-year cycle until it breaks. And right now, there's no reason for me to break it. Resolve in it is waning. I will admit that, and I think people who've watched enough of these will know, because I just feel that institutions and everything else have sort of hijacked the Bitcoin dominance more than in previous cycles. But the 4-year cycle has always been a Bitcoin cycle, not an altcoin cycle. Altcoins have just happened. Their cycles happen to just fit within that. So I'm going to still work on the assumption that the 4-year cycle is still in play. We still have 6 months to go. And as we've seen in previous cycles, 6 month periods can have huge impacts. This was a 6-month move from just under 2,000 to 20,000. These were 6 months moves. This was 30,000 to 69. This was a 6-month move. Let me see, April, so we need November. So from 12,000 to 64, that was a 6-month move. So in 6 months, Bitcoin can move a large amount. So, don't rule it out just yet. So I do feel that, Bitcoin has definitely got an opportunity to peak within this year and still give us a satisfactory gain. The top of my green and yellow boxes bear no reflection as to where I think the price is going to go. They're just cut and copy paste size boxes moved across. So it doesn't mean I think it's going to go to 240,000 or indeed 500,000. I wish. But altcoins, and this is where I know I potentially, sort of into in the community, because I'm just not as convinced on altcoins this cycle. I just haven't seen I feel like I'm losing one of you every time I sniff, but it's better than me Taylor Swifting a piece of snot dribbling into my mouth or whatever. I just haven't seen altcoins perhaps perform how we would like them to do. Of course, there are outliers that have done well. Solana has been one of those. Tau has been one of those. Although I'd argue recently Tau has lost a bit of steam. And I suppose we've got to remember that not 2-3 weeks ago we got a new all-time high of $112,000. But where was the FOMO at that time? Where was the greed? Where was the euphoria? And I mean genuine retail euphoria that those of you that have been in previous cycles have felt during the mass run-ups in 2017 and 2021. It wasn't really there. I mean, the fear and greed index, I actually do have the fear and greed index on. So let's just make it a little bit bigger. You know, when we got the all-time high, fear and greed was actually only at 74. I mean, we have a higher fear and greed in and around the election result. The first time we crossed over 100,000. We had much higher fear and greed in March 2024. You know, so we've not really seen the huge amounts of greed we need to see sort of in the high 90s to give us some sort of indication. Unfortunately, this won't go back far enough. I know it doesn't. It's just stops just before this peak here. And we had lost quite a bit of it. But I feel like we're missing that. And, you know, altcoins, they rely on retail. They do rely on retail. And I understand that the crypto space is well populated, but we need new retail coming in with their FOMO, with their fear, and with their greed, insatiable appetite to move that price up. And I don't feel like it's quite there. And actually, when you bring on, you know, we'll just use USDT as an example. Interestingly enough, so this is dominance. When this ticks up, that generally says the price is going down. You know, we want dominance to drop down as it's converted from USDT back into cryptocurrency of one form or another. But you can actually see that it on this move up, and it was only a couple of weeks worth of data, but it was stagnant and then has gone up. We haven't really seen that massive drop away from USDT, which is a representation of other stablecoins as well, converting that into sort of moving across into the stablecoin market. And then when we look at stablecoins, so this is total market cap, excluding the top 10. So this is others. And look at it, you know, Bitcoin hit its all-time high, and we were 50% down from the others all-time high, which was set in December. Excuse me, sorry. So we haven't seen that euphoria. We saw euphoria after the presidential election. The hope crypto thought they were getting with Trump in and realigning the economy, etc. Now we're not seeing that. We're seeing Bitcoin moving up and altcoins, you know, being dragged up with it, but not with the same euphoric effect. So the long answer to your question, Andy, or the short answer, summary of my long answer, is I don't know if altcoins are really going to do it this time. I wish that they can, and I'm sure some will, with the best narratives. But right now, it doesn't feel like that is necessarily the case. If we have a look at Total 2, similar picture, you know, all-time high of 1.65 trillion. And we're currently, you know, when we got to all-time high, Bitcoin, 127 trillion, you know, 300 billion down. It's a lot of money. Total 3, similar kind of story. You know, I think these are all-time highs yet, just about all-time highs, 1.16 trillion. And then when Bitcoin hit its all-time high, you know, less than a trillion, I know, rolls off the tongue, those figures. So, yeah, and that includes stable coins, don't forget. So, I just wonder whether that parabolic run really reflects into altcoin. You know, if we put in this one, even this one. I mean, look, lockstep, previous cycles. You can't see because the colour's a bit naff, but it runs up there a little bit late, lags a little bit, similar here, lags a little bit. It's actually kind of on track. Whereas this one, it's just not quite got there. Remember, this represents the previous all-time high. This is the new all-time high, and it's lower. We're seeing that lag, and I think that's twofold. I think that's the multitude of altcoins that are out there. It's also just the dominance that Bitcoin has managed to hold on to. And I will say that dominance can break very quickly, and that greed can move in very quickly. And once retail do get wind of it, and they rush in, and they'll rush in late, we may get to see that blow off top, because they won't be able to buy, or they won't think that buying 0.0001 of a Bitcoin that's worth 150, 160,000 is value for money. They'll shove it into Titcoin or whatever it is, thinking that, well, if I own 10,000 of those, I've got a better chance of making it. Where we know that's not necessarily the case. So yes, that's where I am with that one. And then someone's put here, they've remained anonymous, or they just forgot to put their name. I'm in two minds about selling alts at a loss to move into TAO. What are your thoughts, and how do you handle situations like this? Let's just have a chart on. I don't know what chart to have on just to have this discussion. Let's get rid of that, and let's get rid of this. Let's put TAO on. I don't know what the altcoin is that you're thinking, or altcoin you think it's. I think what you're discussing there, I think it is talked about in the course. But to be perfectly honest with you, it is this. Trading is the loneliest thing you can possibly do, because no matter what circumstances and scenarios are presented to you, you don't know how you are going to react in those situations and what decisions you are going to make. And I know it sounds a cop-out answer, but if you bear with me, the hardest thing to do in trading is, one, take profit, because we're greedy and the grass always feels greener on the other side. So we don't like to take profit because we're worried about what we could lose in the future. The second hardest thing about trading, in my opinion, is admitting you are wrong and doing something about it. And that, to me, sounds like what you're probably feeling. You bought some alts, whatever they may be, and for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable in being in them right now, and you're wanting to put them into another altcoin. But the problem you've got is you've got to sell them at a loss. And so you're worried, well, that loss is going to be recognized, and how can we cross? I would just say, and I know Simon would agree with me on this, don't let that enter your mind. I would just, if I'd made the decision that I wanted to change, don't go for the next pump, because chances are, if you wait for a pump for it to get out, the asset you're going to want to go into is going to pump as well, if not the same amount, maybe more. And so you're still losing out. Get rid of whatever you don't want to be in. If you need to have a break and a mental reset from that, then just sit in stables whilst you try and understand what it is you want to do. But if you made that decision that you don't want to be in that alt for whatever reason, it's a bad alt, it's got a bad business plan, tokenomics, being rugged, whatever, just get out. Just get out and just be comfortable moving in to wherever you are at a loss. Accept that loss has happened and just get on with it. There's so many altcoins I've been in where I left at a loss. And I promise you, from experience, you only remember it for a week or so. Of course, there's some really big ones you'll always remember. But generally you forget, because you go through it a few too many times, or I certainly have. You can't remember them all, or you appreciate that actually by the end of it, or that was the right decision no matter what the loss was, and you're happy to move through. But if I'm being totally honest with you, and this goes back to the point that I made, I can't do what I want to do, but I'm telling you now what I'm going to do. I have made a decision that I'm going to reduce my alts when I get back. So I'm in Link, Near, Ondo, SPX 69,000 and TAO, and then Bitcoin. And I'm going to end up having to sell Link at a loss again. Link has been a bane of my life this cycle. I've always seemed to have sold it at the wrong time. But the thought process behind it is not, I don't have a bad say necessarily about the projects, but I actually want to try and do a little bit more. So I don't think I'll sell any of the TAO that I've got. And I won't sell all of the remaining alts, but I am going to reduce their positions. And I'm just going to actually look to trade instead. I think there is a much better opportunity to trade at the moment, particularly when I talk about tariffs, particularly when I talk about volatility, particularly when I talk about the fact that I don't think altcoins are going to do as well as they've potentially done in past cycles. I can actually then just try and gain an edge from looking to trade that instead. And I'm talking about perps rather than spot trading here. And it doesn't have to be necessarily high leverage. And I could even just trade the tokens I'm in. But I feel that provides me with a better opportunity to be able to do it. Now, I can't do anything at the moment because I'm on holiday. I don't have access to my hardware wallets to be able to do that. So I kind of do have to sit on my hands for a week before I do. But I imagine by the time we have the next call, I'll have done that decision. And yeah, and I think there's some people that are in the trading chat posting charts, talking about trades that have done really well and are doing well. And I think they're posting some good information in there. And I know that I can see stuff like that. I just haven't been taking advantage of it because life hasn't afforded me that opportunity to. Well, I don't want to sit in some of my alts now. And I do have, spare capacity and spare time to be able to get back into some trading. Now, I'm not like, for those of you who knew, I like to be in and out within a day. I think there's always another trade. Sorry about sniffing again. And particularly with that word tariff floating around, I think, profits can be wiped out very quickly. So I've got a different stance to that. And yeah, I don't get 44-hour trades. But I'm happy sometimes just getting a 2-hour and getting, or even a 1 hour and getting out if it's only for a couple of hours or whatever it may be. So I'm going to look to do that instead. And that will, getting back to your point, whoever put this question in there, involve me selling some of my link at a loss. But I can just keep on sitting at it, wait until I get back to break even and then selling it. Or I can just accept that there's a loss that's going to be had and just try and make something from that. And I think that's a better way of doing it. And it did take me a couple of cycles to get that mindset in my head. But once you do, then you've just got to worry about the hardest thing, and that's taking profit. Anyway, so that's that. Let me close some of these down. I'm just going to shut some of these down because I think my computer is, it's only like a crappy little laptop I've had for far too long. I think it's just running a little tired at the moment. I'm just going to then do a bit of charting, 10 minutes or so, and then I think the thing will knock it on the head. Come on. See how slow it's moving. That's why I've been worried that you guys might have just been seeing, the circle of doom. Anyway, before we do, so I was going to talk about fear and greed, and that was all related to, look, where is the FOMO? Where's the fear? Those of you who are in 2021 or 2017, you all know what that FOMO feels like. Where's the taxi driver telling us to buy loop ring or whatever? But look, Bitcoin season, 18. It's strong Bitcoin season still at the moment. I'd mentioned I was going to talk about this guy, and then we'll get into it. Some of you may not even be aware this is going on, but there's a guy on Twitter called James Wynn, and he is putting in some outrageous leverage trades at the moment. And he's already been hit and wiped out once, liquidated once, and he's just not learned from his lesson, and he's gone in again. So James Wynn, infamous risky leverage trader, opened another $100 million position with 40x leverage on the Hyperliquid. His latest bid to lock in $1 billion in gains. So as I mentioned, he already got wiped out recently. He's basically revenge trading it. This is his account. If you want to follow him, he posts all about it. James Wynn Real. And long story short, because he opened his trade earlier on today here at around about 105,000. Doesn't matter if the figure's exactly right. And his original liquidation price was 104.58. So what did the market do? Immediately went down. I mean, why would a market maker not want to hunt that? Can you imagine that someone's just opened that amount? I think he amounted like $900,000 worth of fees in the first 2 hours. That's how big a position this was that he was going in. He didn't get liquidated because he put an additional 400,000 in to lower his margin down to 104,151. But again, the market makers just drove the price back down. So then he went out onto the Twitter and he asked people to send money to fight the cabal, as he called it, market makers as we call it, to send in further money, and people did, mad as they were. And so his new liquidation level is 103,612, and this is the Gandalf line at the moment, certainly for him. Now, there's other factors I think are going to drive that down. You know, if you believe me, when I think about what market makers are going to do, they are going to see that, and they may. You know, what a great maneuver here. So you drive it down low, you see the recovery. Everyone gets excited and starts jumping on board. And this is just building up this liquidation level as degens that believe in this guy. How many followers has he got? 320,000. Jump on board. I mean, the article goes into just, how many people, look how many transactions are happening. I don't say they're all following him on all of these, liquidations, on all of these dexes, etc. So it's going to have a hell of a following. So that may just mean, we'll bring the price back up again. We'll increase that honeypot for us to go back down, and we'll smash back through it. I would say, if you've got a chart in front of you and you're interested in that, draw that line up. Now, the cynic in me actually says that Mr. Wynn isn't a real person. Mr. Wynn is probably the market makers creating this, or at least he has been funded by the market makers to create this level of interest. Because I didn't follow him beforehand, but I've started to see where it is. I've heard of him. It's going to be exactly the same. He's been trending just with the amount of positions that, and so the size of these positions are going under. And maybe they are either funding him or they are just him to create some interest and some level volatility within the market in which they can take advantage of. But yeah, an interesting story nonetheless. Sorry, I was supposed to cover that a little bit earlier on. Let's just get into some quick analysis here, and then we'll knock it on the head. Can't believe I managed to ramble on for an hour. So Bitcoin on the daily time frame. Look, we've had that nice move up. We talk about consolidation periods at the moment, and the ideal dream that we aim for the 50 EMA. Well, we've had, you could argue on the daily. You could argue that this is just one rise. You could argue that because we broke the 50 EMA with volume. This would be the W. Broke the 50 EMA, and we've just gone up. We're now, potentially coming down to the 50. That's what's happening here. For that sort of retest in that first consolidation. I know we talked on the 4 hours that actually we might be seeing another picture. But if we just forget rise counts at the moment, we just have a look here. What have we lost? We've now trading under the 10 and the 20. Now the 10 has been our safety net, for the last month and a half. And whenever we've lost it, the 20's caught us. Well, actually, we lost both of those. We came back up for the 10, and now we've rejected off that. And so that really is sort of causing into question, well, wait a second, where's the next move? The bottom of that level is 102, let's call it 103,000. Well, wait a second. This boy here is at 103,600. We think market makers may end up taking us down there just to liquidate him. And then that just so happens to coincide with, sorry, my PC is going really slow now, with his position. Not to mention, is this some sort of bear flag we're potentially seeing here for a move back down 15-minute time frame? But anyway, so I could see that on the cards there. Then we go back to what I talked about earlier on with those liquidation loans. It was 101,000 to 99,000 effectively, which is kind of this vector candle zone. And if we do lose that 102 level, fine. We've got the 50 EMA, which is 100. But if we then think, well, where could we actually? What is the depth of this trapped liquidity? It's this green vector candle taking us all the way down to 97,800, which would smash us all the way through. Don't know where it is now. Was now. Totally lost it. It's gone. Don't know where I put it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That level there. So just on the daily, I think that I really do feel that unless we turn around, that we're going to probably have a look at that 100k level, psychological level that it is. 50 EMA, 50% of the vector candle recovery seems to be a surefire thing. And then if we just add that fib, I like to add on it. We've got 102.61. So that's taken us to the bottom of this level, which obviously would see Mr. Win liquidated, but then just take us down to this noise here. Or maybe we go to the 382 level, that 96,500, which would see us clear out, yes, the 50, but also that vector candle there. And it's funny that the next zone of vector candles with that move up from the first potential rise, encompasses the 0.5 and the 618 level. Now, that's quite a way down at the moment, so I don't really want to necessarily be talking about those. But there is that. A move down here, we talked about this last week, a move down to that 100k 97 level as well. It's not necessarily the end of the world, okay? That's just a natural pullback after such a strong rally from the lows in the beginning of April. We haven't had a pullback, All of our consolidation periods have been sideways price action for the last 2 months. Now we're starting to see a consolidation period, which is moving down. But it's perfectly normal for that to happen. On the 4 hour, the only thing you might suggest is that we've had our 3 rises. We talked about those. W formation, rise 1, rise 2, consolidate, rise 3. Oh, there's rise 2. Sorry, mate, it's going slow. And then, what do we have? Well, actually, is that the M formation? And then we've come down. And look, on the 4 hour, we've broken through that 50 EMA with vector candles and speed right the way back down. The 200's kind of caught us, so this could be a short drop 1 on the 4 hour as we've come back up to this 50 EMA. Sorry, it's not going to let me draw it that well. Now we've effectively retraced off that, and then maybe we continue down. And hey, that's fine. A 3-sided drop doesn't have to totally take out all of these retracements that we've necessarily made. I would say that is a pretty quick drop 1 if it is one on the 4 hour. But yeah, we're just going to need to sort of probably just build that one up. But there definitely looks like there's a bit of a topping pattern on there. Actually, which reminds me, was it on this one? Excuse me, no, I think it must have been Tau. Okay, we'll have a look at that later. But yeah, so I'm thinking that's there. What I would say, though, on the 4 hour, again, the 200 EMA, which is a pretty decent resistance level, is basically 103,000, which would be unfortunate for Mr. Win, but it would be an ideal point for the market, for price to potentially turn around. And I think, like a red bull to a rag, that red rag to a bull even, I think that liquidation zone is probably going to be too tempting. But anyway, we shall see on that one. Let's just go on to Tau. I'm going to put it on the daily. So I think it was Alan that posted in Discord just about he's going to remain temporarily bearish on Tau until proven otherwise. I don't think that's necessarily a bad place to be. That strong move up. So whether you take that as a W formation on the 4 hour, or you take this W formation here on the daily, this does seem to be a topping pattern at the moment. And I think we just got to be careful with it. There's 3 tops to it, but also look at these 3 moves up. That move there, this move here, and then this move here. So we've had 3 attempts at moving up, but just, what you notice from those 3 moves is that each of the 3 moves failed to take a new high. Okay? And so we know that those 3 moves were running out of steam each time. Now, if that selling pressure on Mexi is to be true, then there was potentially, some falling that could be seen. Now, some deleted, some indicated there, I'm not sure what. There we go. What's going on now? Now, this could just be another consolidation period with the move up, and we are still within that range, which is why I can't necessarily do anything. I talked about it last week. 380, 50 EMA, the 200 EMA, and that's exactly what it turned around on. In fact, it went all the way down to the bottom of the cloud. So you're kind of going to have to wait for it to lose that level until you had any level of certainty. You could risk even a short-term move here from 400 to sort of that 380 kind of level, but whether the risk to reward is worth that, I'll leave that in your assessment. But there definitely does seem to be some sort of move down. And again, I stress that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Such a strong move out of there, limited, sideways or downwards consolidation. We're finally having a period in which that could happen. And if I just clear all of this, I would argue that it could come all the way down to 340 and still not invalidate anything with that move. And then if we do throw one of these on, I mean, that turned around perfectly on the fib level there. Okay, the 382 is actually 326. Maybe you wick down to that one if you lose it. But we've got vector candle recovery as support, taking that down as a level of support, 50 EMA, 200 EMA, 50 EMA cloud, and the fib level. I'm not saying we can't go through that, but if that's the Gandalf line, that 375, let's call it, I feel that's where the real battle could be at. If we lose that and we start consolidating under all of that, then I think we may have a bit of trouble. But that's what I'm looking at in the short term. As I say, can't really do two. I can do if I wanted to on my mobile phone, but I'm just not looking at the charts enough to do anything for Tau. So I'm just watching that. And the 4 hour, I mean, we've left the fib on there. You can kind of see we have lost, we've lost the 50, we've lost the 10, we've lost the 20. Oh dear. Oh dear. What's going on here? I'm trying to zoom in for you. This 4 hour candle's only got 40 minutes to go, or whatever. We've lost that 200 EMA as well. And then, it's a nice vector attack mechanism there. And then the 800 and the fib level we talked about previously, just to catch that. I just got to say, it feels like that might be where it's going. Then the question is, do we just see a repeat of what we've seen? And is there an opportunity for, it may not go as high, but, taking advantage of that move? And maybe there is. Hopefully by then, I'll be back and be able to do some perp trading and take it from there. But that's what I'm seeing on Tau. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I ain't running to the hills necessarily with that, but it's just something we need to take on board. I think I'm probably going to knock it on the head there. I've been rattling on for over an hour at the moment. What I will say is, just be careful, be mindful. I truly believe we're still in a fundamentally driven market at the moment, and the key word being tariffs driving most of that. CPI data is not till next week. We don't have FOMC for a couple of weeks, but I don't think that's looking like that's going to get dropped. So I feel that narrative is really going to be driven by tariffs in whatever way that can be driven. At the moment, it's been seen negatively, so we would expect some positive news to bring that up. But we'll have to just wait and see on that one. Everything will be back to normal next week. Back in the UK, back on Tuesdays, back at 8 p.m. We've got a trading pub again on Thursday afternoon, 1 o'clock UK time. But other than that, enjoy the rest of your evening, enjoy the rest of your week. Any questions, as always, please feel free to send them to Discord. And other than that, enjoy the rest of your evening. Cheers now.